Okay, we're picking up. We're progressing through the minor prophets. We're in the book of Nahum. And once again, this is a prophecy related to Nineveh, Assyria. You know, the last one we saw was Jonah, and Jonah came and said, 40 days you're going to fall, and 40 days they didn't fall. God had mercy on them. They revived. So now we're looking at not 40 days, but maybe like 100 years later. And Nahum comes on the scene. Nineveh's flourishing, dominating the region, and they're a ruthless people. They're still a ruthless people. And Nahum, it says in verse 1:1, says, the oracle of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkashite. Elkashite is some resident probably in Judah somewhere. And once again, he has a vision, sees what God's doing in that time. Nahum historically, or Nineveh historically falls in 612 BC, so this was probably before that, somewhere around 620. And why is Nineveh prospering? That's the question that Nahum has. And why are they prospering? I mean, this wicked people, God, how can you let them do this? Jonah had prophesied their destruction, and you know, like we said, it was going to happen in 40 days, and it didn't happen because they repented. And now it's 100 years or so later, and Nahum begins to prophesy this same thing. So Nahum's message is much like Jonah's, and so we're going to pick it up in chapter 1, verse 2. It says, a jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. I always like that passage, kind of a picture of the clouds being just the dust of the Lord's feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither, the blossoms of Lebanon wither. Mountains quake because of him, and the hills dissolve. Indeed, the earth is upheaved by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. You know, some of this may not be just speaking about that day, but maybe actually speaking once again, which we see so often in the scriptures. It goes to that last time, the final judgment, when the Lord comes, and kind of what he does is he goes through the earth, redeeming the earth and bringing it under his rulership. Verse 6, who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? The answer is, nobody. Nobody can. His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken up by him. Then at verse 7, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. Once again, encouraging thing to God's people is he knows your heart. He can find you in the midst of all those people, and if your heart is really toward him, he can do something special toward you that he's not doing towards everybody else. We saw that Egypt, when Israel was in Egypt, when it became dark over the entire land, it was light over the people of God. When those final judgments came across all those other people in the land of Egypt, the people of God were immune to that. So verse 8, but with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of its sight and will pursue his enemies into darkness. Whatever you devise against the Lord, verse 9, he will make a complete end of it. Distress will not rise up twice. So he's just saying here, you know, his judgments are pretty strong and pretty final and pretty severe. So this is a warning against Nineveh. Now Nineveh is just living in their arrogance. And they think, you know, nobody can do anything to them. And so here's this announcing, Nahum's coming along and said, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. You're coming down. In verse 14, the Lord has issued a command concerning you. Your name will no longer be perpetuated. I will cut off idol and image from the house of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are contemptible. Then he goes on in verse 15, a famous verse that comes into the New Testament even. Behold, on the mountains of the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah. Pay your vows, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely. So the promise is coming. This prophecy is not just coming. It's really not coming even so much for the sake of Nineveh, which isn't going to respond. It's coming for the sake of the people of God, once again, that God is going to protect you. He is going to restore you. This is coming to an end. He will take care of you. So the prophecy is really, when all this stuff is going on, God is foreseeing, he foresees your future and your hope, and he's going to do something about that. While Jonah gave a message and there was compassion, in Nahum's message we see it's just over. This is it. This is your last warning. And so we go through that, and we get to the point, it says in verse 1 of chapter 2, says, the one who scatters has come up against you. Man, the fortress, watch the road, strengthen your back, summon all your strength, for the Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel, even though devastators have devastated them and destroyed their vine branches. So once again, we see that final hope that we always see is that even though we've seen all this destruction in your land, it's come about by this evil Nineveh, by the Assyrians, and he says God is going to restore them. And then the final judgment is pronounced. In chapter 3, verse 1, woe to the bloody city, completely full of lies and pillage. Her prey never departs. The noise of the whip, the noise of the rattling of the wheel, galloping horses and bounding chariots. So he's just describing, verse 4, all because of the many harlotries of the harlot, the charming one, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations by her harlotries and families by her sorceries. And so a lot of times, it's speaking not only of the immorality among the individuals, but it's speaking of the immorality of a nation turning to other gods and pursuing those gods. And it names some other places here as a message to Egypt and some others. And we get to the end here, it says, verse 14, draw for yourself water for the siege, strengthen your fortifications, go into the clay and tread the mortar, take hold of the brick mold. There fire will consume you, the sword will cut you down. It will consume you as the locust does, multiply yourself like the creeping locust. So he's just pronouncing all these things, no matter what you do, you can't get away from it. Verse 11, I skipped over that. It says, you too will become drunk. You will be hidden. You too will search for a refuge from the enemy. A lot of times in these desperations, you want to do whatever you can to get out of the mindset of what's going on. And drunkenness is a common escape here, it seems. In verse 18, chapter 3, your shepherds are sleeping, O king of Assyria. Your nobles are lying down. Your people are scattered on the mountains, and there is no one to regather them. So he's just saying, the desolation, the end of Nineveh, the end of Assyria here is final. The judgment is cated. You might have had 40 days to repent in the time of Jonah, and you did, but this time it's just the things pile up. And it's, like I said, it's not even really a prophecy anymore to Nineveh so much as it is to the people of God in that day, saying, okay, God is going to come through. There is going to be justice. Righteousness will arise. And I think that's a common question among anybody as we see, the wickedness that continues, like, God, are you going to do anything about this? And so here, Nahum comes along and says, yes, it's coming. It's going to be pretty soon. Like I said, this is maybe, who knows, a year to 8 years before Nineveh falls. Nahum is making this message. And so he finally wraps the whole thing up with this in verse 19. There is no relief for your breakdown. Your wound is incurable. Now, you don't see that much. There's this prophetic hope that we see throughout given to the people of God. But here when he's speaking to Nineveh, it says, your wound is incurable. There's no answer to your problem. You're not going to be healed because you've gone into this apostasy and you just delight in it and you revel in it and you don't care. And then it says, all who hear about you will clap their hands over you, for on whom has not your evil passed continually? There is that point. He's saying, when finally the judgment's heard about you, people are going to be cheering that Nineveh's come down, that Assyria's down, because your evil has gone throughout all the earth. And there is those times, there's a final judgment that comes that says, when it talks about the Spirit of the Lord is upon me in Isaiah 61, it says to preach the gospel and good news, to declare the acceptable year of our God and the day of vengeance, or the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God. There is a time when we'll finally say, yes, evil is broken down, evil is judged, evil is dealt with. Put an end to it. It says people will be clapping their hands, they'll be glad. It said, and we're glad, Nineveh, that you've gone down. And there's a day when all of us will say, we're glad, God, that you're bringing judgment against the evil that just continues to go on. And we see it's righteous and it's just and it's pure. And it's really a part of your heart to revive the lowly and to bring down the wicked and the proud.